Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Tech Motoring. Paul here, and on today's episode we're going to be talking about this, an electric vehicle charger, or as it's supposed to be called, an EVSE. And on today's episode we're going to go over this charger that I've had in my garage for 2.5 years. We're going to open it up, we're going to inspect it, we're going to take a look around, make sure everything looks okay, and then we're going to check the torque on the screws that hold down the cables on the inside of the charger to make sure that they are at the proper torque specifications after 2.5 years. Hit the subscribe button, stay tuned, we'll be right back. All right, everybody, well, welcome back. So like I was saying, we are going to be taking a look at this right here. So this is an Electrify America HomeStation Level 2 EV charger for your house. Now, this is an EV charger that I put in about 2.5 years ago. And since then, I have not really opened it up to take a look inside to check anything, to make sure everything was good and make sure that nothing was wrong. So I really haven't taken much time to actually look at this over the past 2.5 years. So that was a good time for me to kind of open it up, check some things, and I want to use this tool here. This is actually a torque screwdriver, and this will allow you to torque the screws that hold down the cables, the ones that clamp down the cables on the inside of the charger, to make sure that they are at the proper torque settings for that charger. So I'm curious that after 2.5 years to see if the bolts are a little bit loose, or the screws, I should say, are a little bit loose than what they should be. And to be honest with you, I actually didn't even use a torque screwdriver to tighten them up initially. I actually just used a regular screwdriver, tightened them up as good as I could, and that was it. So I'm really curious to see if they backed up a little bit or if they were just never tightened to begin with. Of course, I really won't know for sure exactly what the scenario was after 2.5 years, but at least today I can check them and see exactly what we're looking at. And so I just have this torque screwdriver that I picked up off of Amazon. If you're interested in it, you could just hit down the link below. I'll have a link down there for this tool. Let's give this a shot. Let's go ahead and take apart the charger today, and we're going to, well, take a look at some of the things inside of it, just kind of go over some things. And this is kind of important, especially if you have an EVSE on the outside of your house where it's being exposed to, rain and snow and major temperature swings throughout the year. But as you may or may not know, copper cabling, when it cools or when it gets warm, starts to expand and contract based on those temperatures. So over time, if those screws are not torqued down properly, they can start to very slowly back out of the threads. And so we want to make sure that that is something that you do, really recommended once a year, to go out in your garage and check these torque settings on those screws to make sure, especially if you're using the charger a lot. If you are driving 100, 150 miles a day, you're coming home, you're plugging the car in almost every single night, this is probably something that's really important to do at least once a year, just to make sure that the screws are tight. You're not going to have any arcing between any of those steel contacts in there. So let's jump in. First thing we got to do first is take the electricity away from this. So we want to make sure that we turn this off at the breaker in our breaker panel. And then of course we'll have some ways of checking that as well. All right, so I've turned the breaker off to the EVSE here. We can see that the light has shut off, so we are pretty confident now that we do not have power going through this. Once we take the cover off, we're going to do one more thing to verify that there is no power in here as well. In the meantime, let's get this cover off, which requires us to take off this one security torque screw here. All right, and then behind here we do have some more screws that we got to take out for this. All right, so as we can see right here, we have our 220 volt cables coming from our circuit breaker. And what I have here in my hand is a non-contact voltage tester. So this allows you to get close to a live wire and it will beep and let you know that there is actually current still passing through that cable. So if I take this and go over to these cables, I'm not getting anything from any of the cables, which means that there should be no power going to this box whatsoever. If there was power, this would beep and light up to warn me to let me know. So now I feel pretty safe to be able to handle this and not worry about getting electrocuted. All right, so let's take a look at these screws now. All right, so once again, for those of you who have these outside, you want to make sure that the gasket seal that goes around the outside of your charger looks good, it's not breaking apart. Make sure that there's no water or any type of moisture very obviously sitting on the bottom of your charger or anywhere that there shouldn't be any water, basically. Of course, we want to make sure we look at all the circuit boards, make sure there's no signs of any type of water spots, rust, anything like that. Take a look at your cable, especially your grounding cable. You want to make sure your grounding cable is nice and clean, just like this one. If it starts to look a little corroded, it's getting a little bit of like green on it, that means that it might be starting to catch some moisture, which is not necessarily good. So what we're going to do is these are the 3 screws in question here that we're going to be checking today. And what we're going to do is I'm going to put a little black dot at the top of each of these screws, and then we're going to torque them to the amount that they need to be torqued to. And we'll see if that little dot changes at all and see how far it actually does change. So let's go ahead and get those on there. All right, so we got our 3 black dots on top of each of those screws. So now we know where they start. We've also gone ahead and checked the manual for how much torque we have to apply to those screws based on that block that they are screwed into. And for this particular charger, it recommends that you torque them from 33 to 40 inch-pounds per screw. So what I've gone ahead is I got my screwdriver here and I've set it for 38 inch-pounds. So I figured that's pretty good. It's not quite 40, but 38 should be fine. It's more than it recommends as far as the range goes. So I think that's going to be pretty good. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to put this screwdriver into the first screw here, and then we're going to turn it, and we're going to see what it tells us as far as what 38 inch-pounds looks like. So let's go ahead and do the first one. Okay, pretty good. And now the ground. Okay, there we go. So we got the notice that we were within the range on this device here. So we got them up to about 37, 38. It looked like it was starting to beep at. So we can see that we were actually able to turn those screws a little bit to their specified torque setting. So let's get a close-up of this so you can take a look. All right, so once again, taking a close look here. As you can see on that first screw right there, it turned ever so slightly. So that one was pretty tight. The second one here, you can see we got almost half of a turn on it. So that is pretty interesting. Almost a half a turn on that screw. And the ground was actually pretty good. It only looked about the same as the first one. So pretty close, those two. But that middle one right there, that was absolutely backed up. It definitely needed to be tightened. So I'm very happy to do this. And yeah, something that everybody else should be doing as well. All right, everybody, well, there you go. So we now have the screws tightened to their proper torque specification. I got the EVSE turned back on from the breaker, so it's going through its little boot up sequence here. And now I just feel better about knowing that everything is done to the proper specifications. We don't have to worry about, oh, did I tighten those screws all the way? Oh, I hope there's not any arcing or shorting inside of the EVSE. You know, these are all things that we do have to consider when it comes to having electric vehicles at home. And this is just one more thing to kind of complicate it in a way. You do have to charge your car at home technically, and if you do, then it's one more piece of equipment that you have to think about. And so making sure that you maintain that piece of equipment is really, really important. Now, if you don't feel comfortable doing this for yourself, then I highly recommend calling an electrician, having them come out and doing an inspection of the charger or EVSE once a year. I think that's a pretty good solid time, especially if you're going to be using this outside. If this charger was on the outside of my house, I would definitely be more concerned about, is there anything getting into it, moisture, water? Is there a possibility that those screws could be loosening up because of the more extreme temperature swings throughout the year? So I highly recommend getting this serviced either by a professional, or if you are comfortable yourself, just to check it out at least once a year. And I will be changing up this entire area of my garage. This is going to be a completely new charging area for me moving forward anyway, because this charger is actually going to be going to my brother since he recently just purchased a Chevy Bolt for himself. So he's going to be getting this charger. But this was just something I wanted to check for myself. And now that I have the proper tools to actually torque down those screws, I'm going to feel more comfortable when I give it to my brother for him to use in his garage. If this video helped you out, if you found it interesting, make sure you give it a thumbs up just below the video. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, make sure you do by clicking that subscribe button below the video as well. Anyway, I'd like to thank you very much for watching today's episode. And remember, welcome to the future and welcome to Tech Motoring. And we'll see you on the next episode.